Teaching and looking after the children became harder rather than easier as I got to know them. Master Tom not only refused to be controlled, but tried to control me and his sister. He often refused to do his lessons. Sometimes I had to sit with my chair against the door in order to keep him in the schoolroom. At last, after trying to push me out of the way and making faces at me, he would finally do his work. Tom, however, was not as bad a pupil as Mary Ann. If I asked her to read a book or do some writing, she would drop to the floor and yell loudly. She was too heavy for me to pick up, and so she would lie there until the lunch bell meant that she could escape. Then she would jump up with a big smile on her face. She knew she had won. The children's behaviour meant that it was almost impossible to get them to the dining room at the right time, or make sure they were dressed correctly. Mrs. Bloomfield would then give me black looks, and Mr. Bloomfield would make disparaging comments about me to his wife while I was in the room. This upset me. I had tried everything I could think of to teach and control the children. In desperation, I decided that I should focus on two very important things in order to change their behaviour. I had to be patient and I had to be strict. So I focused on doing this with all of my strength over the coming weeks. However, it did not matter how hard I tried. Their behaviour did not get better. I will never forget one cold, snowy January afternoon. The children had come into the schoolroom, shouting that they planned to be naughty, and they had done exactly that. While I was holding Tom down on his chair and making him do his work, Mary Ann took my work bag and started to look at what was inside it. When she saw that it only contained my work papers and books, she threw it into the fire. Letting Tom go, I ran to the other side of the room and pulled the bag out of the fire. Then Tom jumped up from his chair and yelled, "Let's throw her desk out of the window!" He grabbed my desk, which contained my letters and the little money I owned. I quickly went to rescue it. Both children then ran away from me out of the house and into the snow, where they rolled about shouting with happiness. I stood in shock, watching them. While I was wondering what to do next, I heard a voice behind me. "What on earth are the children doing?" It was Mr. Bloomfield. "I can't get them to come inside, sir," I said, turning round. "Come in now, you dirty brats, or I'll hit both of you," he yelled. The children ran into the house. "There, you see? They come at the first word," he commented. "Yes, when you tell them what to do, sir," I told him. "And it's very strange that you don't seem to be able to control them, isn't it?" he said. "You're meant to be their governess." It was true. I could not control them, at least not without hitting them, or saying that I was going to hit them, which was what their father did. But I felt sure that hurting them was not the right thing to do. Later that evening, just before I entered the dining room, I heard Mr. Bloomfield telling his wife about the afternoon's events. "Goodness," I heard Mrs. Bloomfield say, "do you really think the children are safe with her? I'm beginning to wonder." I heard no more, but that was enough. From that day forward, Mr. Bloomfield would often come and check on the children while we were in the schoolroom or in the garden. Of course, Tom and Mary Ann were always doing something they should not be doing. If I was quiet at the moment Mr. Bloomfield appeared, he said that I was not doing enough to control them. If I was telling them off, he complained that I was being too strict. I could not win. One day in May, Tom came out of the bushes in the garden, carrying a nest of young birds, with Mary Ann running behind him. He put the nest on the ground and stood over it with his legs wide apart, his hands pushed into the pockets of his trousers. "You're not having any of the chicks, Mary Ann. They're all mine, and I'm going to take them out and pull their legs off," Tom cried. "But Tom," I said calmly, "I will not allow you to hurt birds. The nest must be carried back to the place you took it from." "No, I won't move from here, and I won't tell you where we found them," he replied. "Then, if you don't change your mind and tell me," I replied, "I will carry them back into the bushes and leave them there, even though their mother may not find them." When Tom still refused to return the birds, I decided that I must do what I had said I would do. I picked up the nest and walked quickly into the bushes and trees nearby. Luckily, Tom did not attempt to follow me, but started yelling loudly instead. I walked until I was far away from the main garden, then I pushed the nest into a bush. When I returned to the garden, I saw that Mr. Bloomfield had appeared, and Tom had begun to angrily tell him what I had done. Mary Ann stood nearby, crying. "I see," said Mr. Bloomfield, when Tom had finished his story. "Never mind, Tom. I'll find you some more chicks tomorrow, and you can do what you want with them." Feeling anger rising up inside me, I turned to Mr. Bloomfield and told him, "And if Master Bloomfield tries to hurt them, then I will feel it is my duty to take those away from him too." "Will you?" he said, and then he looked at me for a long moment before walking away with the children towards the house. When I reached the house myself, it was clear that Tom had told his mother about the nest. "I am sorry, Miss Gray, that you stopped Master Bloomfield from enjoying himself," she said coldly. "When Master Bloomfield's enjoyment involves injuring animals," I answered, "I think it is my duty to stop it. I believe that it is wrong to hurt animals for our enjoyment. But I don't think," she said, becoming impatient, "that a tiny animal is more important than my son's enjoyment. Do you?" I took a breath and thought carefully before I spoke. "For the child's own education, he should be taught to be respectful and kind," I answered, as politely as I could. "Oh, of course," she replied, "but respect and kindness are for people, not animals, and I do not think that you have shown much respect and kindness to my son by taking away something he had spent a long time looking for." I decided it was best to say nothing more. This was the nearest I had come to having an argument with Mrs. Bloomfield. It was also one of the longest conversations I had ever shared with her. Not long after this, Mrs. Bloomfield told me that after the summer I would be no longer needed. She explained that while my general behaviour had been acceptable, she and Mr. Bloomfield felt that the children had made very little progress since my arrival. Although the children were more intelligent than most children of a similar age, she told me, their schoolwork was a disappointment and they were not well behaved. She believed that this was because I had not been patient and strict enough with them. But these were exactly the things that I had been focusing on with all my strength. I wanted to tell her how hard I had been trying, but I began to feel upset. I was worried that I would start to cry, so I said nothing, and that is how I was dismissed from my first job. What would my family think of me? After everything I had told them, I had not been able to keep my job as a governess. However, as upset and disappointed as I was, I knew that all parents were not like Mr. and Mrs. Bloomfield, and all children were not like theirs. Surely the next family would be different, and any change must be for the better. There was no doubt that I had learnt a lot at Wellwood House. I felt confident that I could be more successful with a new employer. I returned to my parents' house, and for a few months I enjoyed a much more relaxing life at home. However, it was not long before I was ready to look for another job. After a few weeks of searching, I was offered a job as a governess for the family of Mr. Murray. The family lived at Horton Lodge, which was a large house about 70 miles away from our village. I had never travelled further than 20 miles from home before, so I was excited by the idea of seeing a little more of the world. The Murray children were a little older than those of the Bloomfield family, and so I hoped that teaching them would be less challenging. In addition, my salary was going to be £50 a year, so I felt sure that I would be able to send a good amount of money back home to help my family. It was decided that I would start my new job at the end of January. When at last the morning came, it was a wild, stormy day, and it was snowing heavily. My journey was long and difficult, and it was dark when I finally arrived at the impressive front door of Horton Lodge. A servant invited me inside and took me straight to the schoolroom, which was at the back of the house. There, 2 young ladies were sitting by the fire. I supposed that they must be my new pupils. After we had been formally introduced, the older of the 2 girls spoke.
"Miss Matilda, why don't you show the new governess her room? I'm sure she is cold and tired after her journey,"
she said to the other girl. Miss Matilda was a strong-looking girl of about 14. She stood up and, a little shyly, asked me to follow her. She took me to a room at the very top of the house. Although small, the room was comfortable enough, and I was pleased to be able to take off my wet coat. Matilda left me alone to organise my things and change into dry clothes. A few minutes later, the maid brought me some tea and bread. Feeling a little sad and lonely, I then sat down on the bed and cried. The next morning, I woke up feeling nervous, but also curious to know what my new life would be like in this house. I went down to the schoolroom to begin what would be the first day of 2 years of teaching the girls. I do not want to bore you with all the details of the first year or 2 with this family. I will simply describe the family and give you a general idea of this time. The head of the family, Mr. Murray, was a tall, well-built man who I did not see very often. Apart from going to church on Sundays, he spent his time horse riding, fox hunting, laughing loudly and yelling at the servants. Mrs. Murray was not an unattractive lady. She was about 40 years of age, and she certainly enjoyed her food. Her main interests seemed to be either holding or going to parties and wearing the very latest fashions. When I met her for the first time, which was not until halfway through my first day, she told me what my duties were going to be.
"And remember,"
she said, after she had explained the importance of good manners and not working the girls too hard,
"that it is best to be gentle with them."
While Mrs. Murray talked a lot about the comfort and happiness of her children, she never once talked about my comfort and happiness. The eldest daughter, Miss Rosalie Murray, was about 16 years old. She was tall and slim, with pale blue eyes and long fair hair. She really was a very beautiful girl. If only I could say such good things about her character. To begin with, she was cold and unfriendly, and, rather like her mother, she was generally only interested in how she looked and in the idea that she might in the future marry someone rich. The fourth person in the family, Miss Matilda, was a tomboy and was very different from her sister. She did not care how she looked and was much more interested in riding her pony or playing with the family's dogs. She was not a good student. She often did her schoolwork too quickly, made little effort, and would run outside as soon as she saw the chance. Once or twice I told her off for not making any effort. However, her mother became so angry with me that I decided that it was best to allow Matilda to do as little as she always had. You may want to know how I spent a typical day at Horton Lodge. This is not easy to describe. I ate all of my meals in the schoolroom with my pupils at whatever times suited them each day. Their hours of study were managed in a similar way. Sometimes the girls decided that they wanted to get all of their studying finished before breakfast, and I would be woken up by the maid at 5:30 in the morning. On one of these occasions, I ran downstairs and waited, only to be told that they had changed their minds and had stayed in bed. On other days, they would simply decide that it was a sunny day and they did not want to study at all. When they were in the schoolroom, they were lazy and often rude. The servants, who saw how the parents and children of the family showed me so little respect, did not make much more of an effort themselves. I sometimes felt disappointed and upset by the life I led at Horton Lodge. But with time and patience, things did get a little better. Rosalie became a little more friendly. When she was not being difficult, she could be fun and pleasant to be with, and I grew to like her. Sometimes when she forgot for a moment that I was the daughter of a poor vicar, I think she may even have loved and respected me. What is more, the house was attractive and spacious, and was better in every way than Mr. Bloomfield's house. It had a large garden and was in beautiful countryside. Every Sunday morning, the whole family and I would leave the house and go out in the carriage. We travelled through this beautiful scenery and along the 2 miles of country roads to the village church.